Biodiversity. What is biodiversity? The variety and number of life forms on Earth is called biological diversity, or shortened to biodiversity. What is a species? Species are organisms capable of breeding freely with each other under natural conditions. Hybridization is the crossbreeding of two different species. Morphology, the physical appearance and characteristics of an organism, also considered the science of the study of these physical characteristics. Individual variability, biologically inherited information we call genetic information, is a primary source of individual variability. Evolutionary change. This term is applied to the change that occurs within an entire population, usually occurring over a long period of time. Genetic diversity. The genetic diversity, as shown here in the diagram, usually refers to individuals of the same species, but yet different. Diversity in ecosystems. Ecosystems are made up of many different species and their physical environment. All these species depend on other species in some way for their own survival. Here is an illustration. Heterotrophs are organisms that cannot make their own food but feed on other living or dead organisms. An autotroph is an organism that is able to make their own food and are dependent on other organisms. Plants are called autotrophs. They depend on microorganisms to recycle nitrogen, carbon, and other nutrients as part of the biogeochemical cycles, and many depend on animals for pollination. Species diversity is described as being the variety of species in an ecosystem and the number of individuals within each of these species. Note, the greatest species diversity exists in ecosystems with many different species that have a large population. The diversity of habitats. The range of physical size, shape, and distribution of the individuals, as well as the habitats and communities in an ecosystem, are together referred to as structural diversity. Structural diversity is critical for biodiversity because it creates microhabitats with a variety of abiotic conditions. An ecosystem with greater structural diversity can support a greater diversity of species, which means then it has a greater biodiversity. The biodiversity, for example, of a healthy rainforest is much greater than that of an even-aged tree plantation in which all trees are the same height. Why is that? Something to think about. Aquatic ecosystems also exhibit a great range of structural diversity. Try snorkeling to prove that this is true. Consider flat, smooth ocean bottoms offer little shelter for organisms, while irregular bottoms with rocks, reefs, logs, or even old sunken ships enhance the range of the microhabitats available for organisms. Let's take a look at the interaction and some examples. Food supply. A complex relationship exists between species and their food. For example, bone worms feed exclusively on the bones of dead whales that sink to the bottom of the ocean. Photosynthetic microorganisms live inside the bodies of giant clams and coral animals on reefs. They perform photosynthesis and supply the clams and corals with a steady supply of food. Protection. Many species depend on others for shelter and protection. For example, the hermit crab uses the shells of dead snails for a protective home. Certain species of ants live within the trunks of Ceropia trees. The tree provides shelter for the ants. The ants protect the tree by biting and stinging any herbivore that tries to eat it. Transportation. Many species move from place to place with the help of another species. Some flower mites climb onto the bills of hummingbirds, moving from flower to flower, feeding on the nectar. Many seeds have hooks that allow them to stick to passing animals. They then can be carried long distances before they fall off and begin growing. Oh, that's why weeds grow where they do. Reproduction. Many species depend on other species for their own successful reproduction. Trilliums, Ontario's natural flower, produce seeds with fleshy tissues that attract ants. The seeds are then gathered and dispersed by the ants. If the ants do not feed on this outer seed tissue, the seeds cannot germinate. Many bird species build their nests in the abandoned tree cavities made by woodpeckers for their own nests. Hygiene. Some species help maintain the health of another species. Did you know that coral reefs are cleaning stations where large fish come to have external parasites removed by small fish and shrimp? The bacteria that naturally live on our own skin help protect us from other bacterial and fungal infections. Digestion. Species living within digestive tracts are essential for the digestion of food. Termites consume wood but are almost entirely of digesting it themselves. Instead, a variety of bacteria and other microorganisms living within the termite guts do the digestion for them. Wow! Bacteria living in the large intestines of humans produce vitamins that are absorbed back into the circulatory system. Therefore, maintaining and enhancing biodiversity is essential for the health and sustainability of ecosystems. But there is loss of biodiversity happening as it's threatened by humans. Humans threaten our food supply when entire species and plant varieties are lost. Eliminate sources of natural medicines and potential new medicines. Has a significant economic impact on tourism and forestry when accompanied by habitat destruction. Has the potential to cause serious disruptions in biogeochemical cycles, including the normal carbon uptakes by natural ecosystems. A change in climate may make conditions too hot or cold, too wet or dry for species adapted to the original climatic conditions. Human actions are resulting in a rapid loss of natural habitats due to agriculture, forestry, urban expansion, the introduction of invasive species, overharvesting of wild populations, and serious air and water pollution. The production of greenhouse gases is also resulting in human-caused climate change. These human actions, among others, are now operating on a global scale and are increasing the rate of species extinction. Many Canadian species, for example, especially those living in the Arctic, are already feeling the impact of climate change. Caribou depend on the lichens and small green plants as a source of food. While a milder climate does not harm caribou directly, it is causing changes in the Arctic vegetation. Smaller plants, which they love to eat and digest, are being displaced by larger shrubs, reducing the available food supply for the caribou. Let's do our part to support the biodiversity in our ecosystems.